In 2021, in a small town outside Dayton, Ohio, I started getting exactly what I'd always said I wanted. That's the part that still messes with me. If you'd asked me back then what a good week in a relationship looked like, I would have described what she suddenly became: warm, attentive, affectionate in ways that felt almost intentional. Like she'd made a decision and was following through. And I know how that sounds. Most people hear that and think, so what's the problem? The problem was that it didn't feel like love finding its way back. It felt like someone trying to pass a test they hadn't studied for. At the time, I didn't have that language for it. I just had a tightness in my chest that didn't match what was happening in front of me. We were living in a 2-bedroom rental that always smelled faintly like laundry detergent because the previous tenants had shoved the washer and dryer into a closet off the kitchen. We weren't married. No kids. Nothing tying us together except the usual things: time, plans, shared routines, the quiet confidence that you don't need receipts for everything because you're with someone you trust. Her name in this story is Marissa. That's not her real name. I'm changing everything I can, because I'm not trying to drag a real person through a public retelling. But the shape of what happened, the feeling of it, that part is real enough. Marissa wasn't cold before all this. She wasn't cruel. If anything, she was steady. She did her own thing. I did mine. We met in the middle. We weren't one of those couples that texted all day, every day, like teenagers. We had jobs, bills, errands. We'd check in. We'd make dinner. We'd watch something. We'd talk about the weekend. Normal. And that's why the shift caught me off guard. It started with the check-ins. Not just, hey, how's your day, but full updates: where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. It wasn't prompted. It arrived like notifications from a weather app. Leaving now. Traffic's terrible. Stopping for gas. I'm at the store, do you need anything? I'm heading home. At first, I thought it was kind of sweet. Like she'd heard me say, once or twice, that I liked feeling included, and she was trying to do better. There's a version of this story where that's all it is: someone making effort. Someone choosing their partner on purpose. I tried to let myself have that version. Then the affection ramped up. She'd come up behind me while I was washing a dish and wrap her arms around my waist, press her face into my shoulder like she couldn't get close enough. She'd kiss me when she walked into a room, even if she'd just kissed me 10 minutes earlier. She'd sit closer on the couch, legs tucked under mine, fingers tracing the back of my hand while we watched TV like we were in a movie about a couple who'd just fallen in love. If I stood up to get water, she'd ask where I was going. Not in a controlling way. Not sharp. Just, too aware. Where you headed? She'd say, smiling. Kitchen, I'd answer, half laughing. Oh. Okay. Little things. Harmless, if you look at them one by one. But it wasn't one by one. It was all at once. Then came the reassurance. It wasn't just that she was affectionate. It was that she needed constant confirmation that it was landing. Like she couldn't relax unless I responded the right way. Are we okay? You're not mad at me, right? Do you still feel the same about us? Promise you'll tell me if something's wrong. She'd ask these questions at random times. In the grocery store. In bed. Standing at the sink while brushing her teeth. It was like she was checking the locks on a door that wasn't supposed to be in her house. I remember one night, we were lying in the dark, and she rolled onto her side and whispered, "You love me, right?" I said, "Of course I do." And instead of the usual quiet, "Okay," you get when someone's soothed, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. That's when the first real doubt landed. Not, she's cheating. I didn't jump there. I didn't even know how to let my brain go there. I just thought, what are you afraid of? Because people who feel secure don't ask you to prove it every night. And the weirdest part was she wasn't hiding anything. If I walked into a room, she didn't flip her phone over. If a message came in, she didn't tense up. She'd hold the screen out sometimes, almost casually, like she was offering transparency before I even asked for it. Look, she'd say, showing me a thread about someone's birthday plans or a coworker complaining about a shift. People are driving me nuts today. At first, I appreciated it. I thought, okay. This is what open looks like. But after a while, it started to feel less like openness and more like a performance of openness. Like she wanted me to see her showing me things. Over-explaining followed right behind. If she was late, I didn't even have to ask why. I'd get the entire timeline. I left at 5:10, but I forgot my charger, so I turned around, and then I saw there was construction, and I stopped to grab coffee because I didn't eat lunch, and she'd stop herself, laugh too loudly, and say, "Sorry, I'm rambling." I'd tell her, "It's fine. You don't have to report to me." And she'd say, "I know, I just want you to know." That phrase. I just want you to know. It's such an innocent sentence. It can mean, I respect you. It can mean, I care about how you feel. It can mean, I'm trying. But in the wrong context, it can also mean, please don't look closer. There were moments when I caught myself thinking, I don't even remember asking for this. And then I'd feel guilty, because who gets suspicious when someone is being kind? That guilt kept me quiet. I didn't want to be the guy who takes a good thing and turns it into an argument. I didn't want to punish her for effort. I didn't want to admit that the perfect girlfriend phase was making me uneasy, because saying that out loud would make me sound ungrateful, paranoid, maybe even cruel. So I smiled. I leaned in. I matched her energy. I said the right things. And all the while, a small part of me watched the whole thing like a stage play I didn't remember buying tickets for. I started noticing the timing. How the affection spiked after certain days. How the reassurance questions came in clusters, like waves. How she'd seem almost relieved when I acted normal. How she'd brighten when I laughed at something she said, like she was collecting proof that everything was still intact. It wasn't distance that made me uncomfortable. It was closeness that didn't feel earned. And I didn't know what to do with that, because I'd always believed that if something was wrong, you'd feel it as absence, missed calls, cold shoulders, silence at the dinner table. Instead, I was being hugged tighter than ever, and it felt like someone was trying to hold something in place before it fell. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself to stop looking for problems. But late at night, when she'd fall asleep with her hand still on my chest like an anchor, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder why being loved this hard suddenly felt like standing too close to a smiling stranger. Before everything changed, our relationship was the kind that didn't draw attention. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't unstable. It didn't feel like something that could snap in half overnight. That's what made the later part so confusing. There was no obvious before where everything was terrible. There was just normal. Marissa and I met a few years earlier, through mutual friends at a small get-together that was mostly people talking over each other and pretending they weren't tired. I remember she laughed easily. Not in a loud way, but in a way that made you feel like you'd said something smarter than you actually had. We started seeing each other slowly. No whirlwind. No instant obsession. Just dinners, long walks, weekend plans that turned into a routine. She had her own life. I had mine. We liked each other inside that space. That was one of the things I respected about her early on. She didn't cling. She didn't demand constant attention. She wasn't someone who needed to be reassured every hour. She seemed secure, independent, steady. I'd dated people before who lived emotionally on the edge of things, where every silence felt like a crisis. With Marissa, it wasn't like that. We could go a few hours without texting and it didn't mean anything. We could have separate days and still come back together at night without tension. That felt healthy to me. When we moved in together, it wasn't because we were trying to fix something. It was just the next step. Rent made more sense. We were spending most nights together anyway. It felt natural. Our place wasn't fancy. A rental with thin walls, creaky floors, neighbors you heard more than you saw. But it was ours in the way shared spaces become yours, coffee mugs in the cabinet, shoes by the door, grocery lists on the fridge. We settled into routines. She'd get up before me most mornings. I'd hear the shower, the blow dryer, the sound of drawers opening and closing. Sometimes she'd lean over the bed and kiss my forehead before leaving. "See you later," she'd whisper. "Drive safe," I'd mumble. I'd come home later, tired, and she'd already be there or just getting in. We'd talk about our days in pieces. Not long speeches, just small exchanges. Work was annoying. Yeah. Same stuff. Want pasta or takeout? That was us. Simple. Weekends were errands, maybe seeing friends, maybe doing nothing at all. We weren't the kind of couple posting constant photos or performing happiness for other people. We kept things quiet. I thought that meant we were solid. We weren't perfect, obviously. We had disagreements. Little irritations. The usual stuff, money conversations, family obligations, different ways of handling stress. Sometimes she'd get quiet when something bothered her, and I'd have to pull it out of her slowly. Sometimes I'd withdraw when I felt overwhelmed, and she'd tell me I was hard to read. But none of it felt like danger. It felt like two people learning each other. If anything, I trusted her because she didn't seem like someone who played games. Marissa wasn't the type to flirt openly or seek attention. She wasn't constantly scrolling through messages with a secret smile. She wasn't someone I ever pictured doing something reckless. That sounds naive now, but it's the truth. I didn't see her as someone capable of betrayal because she didn't move through the world like a person who needed more than what she had. She had a job she cared about, friends she stayed in touch with, a steady rhythm. She wasn't searching for chaos. And I wasn't either. I had my own life, too. Work, responsibilities, plans. I wasn't sitting around watching her every move. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't controlling. I was comfortable. There's a certain kind of comfort that feels like trust. You stop checking. You stop wondering. You stop imagining worst-case scenarios because it seems almost insulting to even consider them. That was where I was. If she went out with coworkers after work, I didn't think twice. If she had a late meeting, I believed it. If she was tired and wanted to go to bed early, I kissed her goodnight and stayed up watching TV. It wasn't blind faith. It was just normal partnership. And she didn't give me reasons to question it. We talked about the future in vague, ordinary ways. Nothing dramatic. Just, maybe someday, conversations. "Would you ever want to move somewhere else?" she asked once. "Maybe," I said. "Depends." She nodded like that was enough. We weren't rushing. We weren't panicking about timelines. We were just living. Looking back, I think that's part of what made me feel so off balance later. Because there was no big fracture beforehand. No obvious emotional drought. No months of coldness that would explain a sudden overcorrection. It wasn't like she'd been distant and then became affectionate. She'd been steady, and then she became intense. And at the time, I didn't see it as a warning sign. I saw it as improvement. I thought maybe she'd just realized something. Maybe she was appreciating what we had. Maybe she was trying to reconnect in a deeper way. I remember telling a friend casually, "She's been really sweet lately. Like, extra sweet." And my friend smiled and said, "That's a good thing." I smiled back, because that's what you're supposed to do. But even then, somewhere underneath, I felt the faintest unease, like a song playing too loudly in a quiet room. I couldn't explain it. Nothing had happened yet. Nothing was wrong on paper. But the version of us that had always felt effortless was starting to feel slightly rehearsed, and I didn't know why. The change didn't happen in one big moment. It wasn't like she sat me down and said, "I want to be better," or "I've been thinking about us." It was more like waking up one day and realizing the volume had been turned up without anyone touching the dial. At first, I thought it was temporary. A mood. A phase. Marissa started reaching for me more. Not just casually, but constantly. If I was in the kitchen, she was there. If I was on the couch, she was pressed against me. If I was on my phone, she'd lean over and ask what I was looking at, not in an accusing way, just in a way that made me feel like she needed to be part of every moment. She'd touch my arm when she walked past, like she couldn't help herself. She'd kiss me longer than usual, like she was trying to make something stick. One night, I came home from work and she was already waiting at the door. "Hey," she said brightly, wrapping her arms around me before I'd even put my keys down. I laughed a little. "What's this?" "Nothing," she said, still holding on. "I missed you." It should have felt good. And part of me did feel good. I'm not made of stone. Being wanted feels nice. Being noticed feels nice. But it also felt sudden. Like someone turning toward you too quickly. She started complimenting me more, too. "You look really good today." "I'm lucky, you know. I don't tell you enough how much I appreciate you." These weren't bad things. These were things couples are supposed to say. But it wasn't her usual rhythm. It was like she was reading from a list of things a good partner does. Then came the constant updates. My phone would buzz throughout the day. "Just got to work." "Lunch was boring." "Leaving soon." "Stopping by the pharmacy." "Be home in 20. If I didn't respond right away, she'd follow up. "Everything okay? Did you see my message?" At first, I answered because it seemed harmless. I thought she was just feeling more connected. But after a while, it started to feel like she was keeping a record. Not for me. For herself. There was this urgency underneath it all, like she couldn't let any space exist between us without filling it. And the reassurance questions became more frequent. We'd be doing something completely ordinary, folding laundry, brushing our teeth, sitting in traffic, and she'd suddenly glance at me and ask, "Are you happy?" I'd blink. "Yeah." "Why?" "I don't know," she'd say quickly. "Just checking." Checking what? That was the part one couldn't understand. It wasn't like we'd been fighting. It wasn't like I'd pulled away. Nothing had changed on my end. So why did she seem like she was constantly searching my face for signs of something? Sometimes she'd ask in the softest voice, almost like she was afraid of the answer. "You're not going anywhere, right?" I'd laugh awkwardly. "No." "What?" She'd shake her head. "Never mind. Forget it." But she didn't forget it. The questions would come back in different forms. "Promise you'll always tell me the truth. You'd tell me if you stopped loving me, right? You'd never just leave without saying something." It started making me feel like I was being asked to reassure her against something I didn't know existed. Like she was reacting to a threat I couldn't see. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, half watching a show neither of us cared about. She was curled up against me, fingers tracing the seam of my shirt. Out of nowhere, she said, "Do you feel close to me?" I looked down at her. "Yeah." "Really?" "Yes," I said, more firmly. "What is going on?" She smiled too fast. "Nothing." I'm just emotional lately. That was her explanation for everything. Emotional. Tired. Stressed. Work. And work did seem to be taking more out of her. She mentioned her coworkers more often. Not in a suspicious way, just casually. So-and-so was being ridiculous today. My team is driving me crazy. We stayed late again. Normal complaints. But the timing was strange. It felt like every time she came home from one of those longer days, she'd be extra affectionate, almost urgent about it. Like she needed to re-establish something. I started noticing patterns I didn't want to notice. If she was gone later than usual, she'd come in with this brightness that didn't match exhaustion. "Hi," she'd say, too cheerful. "How was your day?" And then she'd kiss me, immediately, before I could ask anything. It was like she was placing a bookmark. Sometimes she'd over-explain without being prompted. I was only late because my manager pulled me into something last minute, and then I talked to Jenna for a second, and then... "It's okay," I'd interrupt. "I didn't ask." "I know," she'd say quickly. "I just want you to know." That phrase again. "I just want you to know." At first, I believed it was consideration. Then it started sounding like something rehearsed. I caught myself watching her in small moments. The way she'd glance at her phone and then immediately look up at me, smiling. The way she'd ask if I was okay even when I was just sitting there. The way she'd seem relieved when I acted normal. And I hated myself for noticing. Because what kind of person becomes suspicious of affection? I didn't want to be that guy. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself I should be grateful she was trying. But it didn't feel like effort born from love. It felt like effort born from fear. Like she was trying to stay one step ahead of something. And the more she leaned in, the more I felt this strange emotional vertigo, like I was standing too close to the edge of a truth I didn't want to look down at. Everything looked fine. Everything sounded fine. But it didn't feel natural anymore. It felt staged. And I couldn't stop wondering what she was trying so hard to cover up. The first time I really noticed the coworker wasn't because of anything dramatic. It wasn't a name that came up in a suspicious whisper or a text she tried to hide. It was almost nothing. Just a casual mention, tossed into conversation like background noise. We were making dinner one night, and she was cutting vegetables too quickly, like she was rushing through something. "Work was chaos today," she said. I glanced over. "Yeah?" She sighed. "Yeah. We've got this new guy on the team and he's already acting like he runs the place." "New guy?" She shrugged. "His name's Ethan." That wasn't his real name, obviously. None of these names are. But the way she said it was so normal that it didn't register as anything. Just another coworker. We all have them. I nodded. "Sounds annoying." "It is," she said, but then she smiled faintly, like she was amused despite herself. "He's just a lot." That was it. If you'd asked me then, I couldn't have told you what he looked like, how old he was, anything. He didn't exist in my world. He was just a character in her workplace stories. Over the next few weeks, though, his name came up again. Not constantly. Not obsessively. Just enough to become familiar. Ethan said something ridiculous in the meeting. Ethan stayed late too. Ethan doesn't know when to stop talking. Each time, it felt like she was complaining. But sometimes, the complaints carried this strange energy. Like irritation mixed with attention. The kind of attention you don't give someone you truly don't care about. Work had always been a separate sphere for her. She didn't bring it home much. She'd vent occasionally, sure, but she wasn't someone who talked about coworkers like they were part of her emotional life. Now they were. And it wasn't just him. It was the whole environment. She started mentioning longer days more often. We had to finish a project. We got slammed. We stayed late again. I believed it because it made sense. People get busy. Jobs demand things. Life isn't neatly scheduled. But I also noticed how she'd say it. Almost preemptively. Like she was building context before I even asked. Sometimes she'd text me in the afternoon. Probably going to be late tonight. Don't wait up. I'd respond, okay. Everything alright? Yeah, just work stuff. Work stuff. Those two words became a kind of blanket. A cover you could throw over anything. And I didn't question it, because why would I? She wasn't secretive. If anything, she was overly transparent. She'd show me her phone sometimes without me asking. Look at this, she'd say, holding up a message thread where someone was complaining about a schedule change. Or she'd laugh at something in a group chat and tilt the screen toward me. Can you believe these people? It felt like proof. Like reassurance. But it also felt intentional. Like she wanted me to see the harmless parts. One night, she came home later than usual. Not outrageously late, just later. She walked in with that same brightness I'd started noticing. Hey, she said quickly. Sorry, it was a long day. I stood up from the couch. It's fine. She crossed the room and kissed me immediately, like she needed to place it there. Then she started talking. We had this last-minute thing, and then Ethan wouldn't stop asking questions, and my manager was stressed, and I swear, I thought I'd never get out of there. She laughed, shaking her head. I watched her. She was talking fast, almost breathless. I said carefully, "You seem wired." She blinked. Do I? Just a little. She smiled. I'm just tired. Then she added, too quickly, nothing weird. Just work. Nothing weird. I hadn't said anything was weird. That was another thing. She started answering questions I hadn't asked. She'd come home and narrate her day like she was trying to fill every silence before it could become suspicion. And again, I hated myself for noticing. Because maybe she was just talking. Maybe she was just sharing. But it didn't feel like sharing. It felt like managing. The coworker himself stayed vague in my mind. I didn't know his face. I didn't know his voice. I only knew the space he occupied in her stories. A presence. A recurring detail. And the workplace became this invisible third thing in our relationship. Not because of jealousy. Because of access. There's something about coworkers that's hard to explain unless you've lived it. They see you every day. They know when you're stressed. They know when you're vulnerable. They know the version of you that exists outside your partner's view. They have proximity. And proximity is powerful. I remember one afternoon, she called me on her way home. She didn't usually call. She'd text. Her voice was bright. Hey, she said. Hey, I answered. Everything okay? Yeah. I just wanted to hear your voice. That should have felt sweet. But there was that undercurrent again. Like she was reaching for something. Or away from something. We talked for a few minutes about nothing. Dinner. Weekend plans. Then she said, casually, Ethan was asking about you today. I paused. Why? I don't know, she said quickly. Just small talk. He was like, does your boyfriend ever get tired of you working late? I forced a laugh. What did you say? That you're supportive, she replied immediately. That you don't mind. Her answer was too fast. Like she'd prepared it. I said, okay. She kept talking, filling the space. He's just nosy. He asks everyone questions. Right, I said. When we hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment. It wasn't the content. It was the feeling. Why was a coworker asking about me? Why was she telling me? Was it transparency? Or was it a way of placing him in the open so he wouldn't feel hidden? I didn't know. I didn't accuse. I didn't confront. I just started noticing that his name existed now, quietly, in the background of our lives. Like a shadow you only see once the light hits it a certain way. And the strangest part was, Marissa seemed more affectionate than ever, as if the more her world expanded at work, the more she needed to pull me close at home. It made no sense. Or maybe it made too much sense. I went to bed that night with her arm draped over me, her breathing steady, her body warm and familiar. And I couldn't stop thinking about a man I'd never met, whose name was suddenly showing up in places it didn't belong. The thing about it is, if she had pulled away, I would have understood. If she'd started hiding her phone, canceling plans, acting cold, disappearing emotionally, I would have had something clear to point at. Something obvious. That's what people expect betrayal to look like. Distance. Secrecy. Silence. But Marissa didn't do that. She moved closer. So close that it became hard to breathe sometimes. And that's what made it so confusing, because the red flags weren't the ones people warn you about. They were wrapped in affection. They were disguised as effort. They looked like someone trying. They felt like someone compensating. It started with the over-explaining. Every time she came home, she'd give me a full report. Not because I asked. Just because she seemed to need to. I stayed late because we had to redo the numbers, and then my manager wanted to talk, and then Ethan was still there, and we ended up leaving at the same time, but it was nothing, just coincidence. She'd say things like that, tossing in unnecessary details like she was padding the truth. I'd stand there, keys in my hand, thinking, I didn't even ask who left when. And she'd be watching my face while she spoke, like she was waiting for my reaction. Sometimes I'd interrupt gently. You don't have to explain everything. I know, she'd say quickly. I just want you to feel secure. Secure. That word started showing up a lot. As if she'd decided security was something she needed to actively manufacture. Then there was the transparency. Or what looked like transparency. She'd leave her phone face up on the table. She'd scroll through messages in front of me, laughing at harmless things. She'd mention coworkers casually, like she was proving there was nothing hidden. Jenna is so dramatic. Ethan is being annoying again. My team is exhausting. It was constant, almost deliberate. And it created this strange effect. It made it harder to doubt her, because why would someone doing something wrong be this open? But it also made it feel like she wanted me to see what she was showing. Like a magician directing your eyes to one hand. Sometimes she'd hand me her phone without hesitation. Can you order the food? My hands are wet. Or, can you look up that address? I'd do it, casually, and she'd watch me with this soft smile. Not nervous. Almost, satisfied. Like she'd passed another checkpoint. Then came the affection spikes. I started noticing how her closeness wasn't consistent. It came in waves. There would be normal days, steady days. And then there would be days where she was almost frantic with attention. She'd touch me constantly. She'd initiate intimacy when it felt slightly out of sync with the moment. She'd look at me like she was trying to memorize my face. One night, she climbed into bed and pressed herself against me, whispering, I love you so much. I said it back. And she exhaled like she'd been holding something in. I lay there afterward, staring into the dark, feeling this quiet discomfort. Love shouldn't feel like relief after fear. It should feel like peace. Then there was the reassurance seeking. It wasn't occasional anymore. It was constant. Are you okay? You seem quiet. Did I do something wrong? You still want this, right? Sometimes she'd ask while smiling, like she was trying to make it casual. But her eyes would be searching. I'd tell her, I'm fine. We're fine. And she'd nod quickly, almost too quickly. Okay. Good. Good. Like she needed that word. Like she needed to hear that everything was still intact. It started making me feel like I was responsible for holding something together that I didn't even know was breaking. And I couldn't figure out what she was afraid of. Because nothing was happening. Not that I knew of. The weirdest part was how she would preempt suspicion. She'd bring things up before they could be questioned. Ethan offered to walk me to my car because it was dark, but I said no, obviously. Obviously. I hadn't asked. Or she'd say, we grabbed coffee after work, but it was just a group thing. Nothing weird. Nothing weird. Again, I hadn't said anything was weird. She was narrating innocence in advance. And I found myself nodding, smiling, playing along. Because what do you do with that? Do you accuse someone for being considerate? Do you interrogate someone for being affectionate? I didn't want to be paranoid. I didn't want to be controlling. So I stayed quiet. But inside, something was shifting. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. Not obsessively. Just, differently. I noticed how she'd come home and immediately kiss me, like she needed to establish something. I noticed how she'd brighten when I laughed, like she was collecting proof that we were okay. I noticed how she'd seem almost restless if there was too much silence between us. Like silence was dangerous. Like silence might allow something real to surface. One evening, we were making dinner, and she was talking about work again. Ethan was being ridiculous today, she said, rolling her eyes. I nodded. Sounds like he's always around. She froze for half a second. Just a fraction. Then she laughed too loudly. He's just, on my team. That's all. That's all. Her voice was light, but her body was tense. And then, immediately, she stepped closer and wrapped her arms around me. You're so good to me, she murmured. I stood there, holding the knife I'd been using to chop onions, feeling her arms around my waist. It was affectionate. It was warm. It was exactly what a partner does. And yet, I felt this strange sensation, like the affection wasn't spontaneous. Like it was deployed. A response. A cover. I started realizing that the red flags weren't in what she was hiding. They were in what she was performing. The relationship wasn't falling apart in front of me. It was being held together too tightly. And the tighter she held it, the more I felt the shape of something underneath. Something unspoken. Something waiting. And I couldn't stop wondering why someone who claimed to feel so close to me suddenly seemed so desperate to convince me of it. I didn't become suspicious all at once. It wasn't a switch. It was more like a slow pressure building in the background, the kind you don't notice until you realize you've been carrying it for weeks. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Then I told myself it was stress. Then I told myself I was being ungrateful. Because who questions affection? Who looks at someone trying harder and thinks, why does this feel wrong? That was the trap. Everything she was doing looked like effort. It looked like devotion. It looked like the kind of relationship improvement people talk about. If I mentioned it to anyone, I knew what they'd say. She's being sweet. Enjoy it. So I kept it to myself. And the more I kept it to myself, the lonelier it felt. I started living in this strange emotional double space. On the outside, I was a guy with a girlfriend who was attentive, affectionate, present. On the inside, I was watching everything like it might mean something else. It was exhausting. I'd be sitting across from her at dinner, listening to her talk about her day, nodding at the right moments, smiling when she smiled. And meanwhile, part of my brain would be scanning for something I couldn't even name. Tone. Timing. Over-explaining. The way she watched me watch her. It wasn't paranoia, exactly. It was unease. A quiet sense that the air had changed. And the worst part was that I couldn't justify it. Nothing had happened. I had no proof of anything. Just a feeling that something was being managed. I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe she's just feeling more appreciative. Maybe she's going through something at work. Maybe she's anxious. Maybe I'm the problem. I actually started wondering if I was emotionally detached, if her affection only felt strange because I wasn't used to being cared for that openly. That thought kept me quiet. I didn't want to punish her for being loving. So I played along. I answered her check-ins. I reassured her when she asked. I hugged her back when she clung. I told myself, this is good. This is what people want. But late at night, when she was asleep and the house was still, my mind wouldn't settle. I'd replay small moments. The way she'd mention Ethan casually, then immediately follow it with a kiss. The way she'd explain where she'd been without being asked. The way she'd ask if I was happy, like she was afraid of the answer. And I'd lie there thinking, why are you acting like you're about to lose me? Sometimes I'd look at her in the dark and feel this strange sadness. Not because I knew something. Because I didn't. Because I couldn't tell if I was imagining cracks in something solid. That uncertainty was isolating in a way I didn't expect. Suspicion without proof doesn't feel like anger. It feels like loneliness. It feels like being the only person awake in a room where everyone else is sleeping peacefully. I stopped bringing things up. Even harmless things. If she was late, I didn't ask why. If she mentioned a coworker, I didn't react. I became careful. Not because I was hiding something. Because I didn't want to see her flinch. I didn't want to be the reason her brightness dimmed. I didn't want to invite conflict over something I couldn't name. So instead, I watched. Quietly. I started noticing patterns more clearly. Her affection would spike after certain days. Her reassurance questions would cluster after certain evenings. She'd come home wired and cheerful, then collapse into closeness like she was trying to erase something. And I felt myself shrinking inside my own relationship. Not physically. Emotionally. Like there was less space for honesty. Because how do you say, you're being too loving and it scares me? That sounds insane. I tried once, gently. We were washing dishes, and she was talking fast about work again, filling the kitchen with details. I said, casually, you've been really attentive lately. She turned quickly. Is that bad? No, I said immediately. No, not bad. Just different. Her face tightened for a second, then she smiled. I just want us to be good, she said. We. Us. Good. The words were right. But something in her voice felt like she was holding onto them too hard. After that, I didn't try again. I didn't want to see that flash of tension. I didn't want to feel like I was stepping on something fragile. So I kept my questions inside. And that's where they grew. I started feeling emotionally alone even while she was right next to me. She'd be curled against me on the couch, her hand on my chest, and I'd be staring at the TV without seeing it, thinking about the difference between closeness and intimacy. Because closeness can be physical. It can be constant. But intimacy is trust. And trust was starting to feel complicated. I remember sitting at work one afternoon, looking at my phone. She'd sent 3 messages in an hour. Just small things. Thinking about you. Hope your day is okay. Can't wait to see you. Anyone else would have smiled. I stared at the screen and felt this hollow uncertainty. Was this love? Or was this insurance? That question made me feel sick. Because once it enters your mind, you can't unthink it. And I still didn't have a reason. Just a growing sense that something was happening outside my view, and the more she tried to keep me close, the more alone I felt inside it. I didn't know what I was looking for. I only knew that I had started paying attention in a way that wasn't going to stop. I didn't find out because I was trying to catch her. That's something I need to say, because people imagine these moments like a movie. Like I was digging through her things, hacking passwords, following her around. It wasn't like that. I wasn't a detective. I was just a person who couldn't shake a feeling. And feelings, when they sit long enough without answers, start to change the way you move through your own life. The day it happened was ordinary. That's what makes it hard to think about. It wasn't an anniversary. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't some dramatic turning point. It was a weekday evening. The kind of day that should disappear into the blur of routine. Marissa came home late again, bright again, kissed me immediately again. Sorry, she said quickly. Long day. It's fine, I replied automatically. She went to shower. I stayed in the living room, half watching something on TV, half listening to the water run. My phone was dead. I'd left the charger at work. When she came out, towel around her hair, she picked up her bag and started rummaging. Can you plug my phone in? She asked casually. I'm going to make tea. Her phone was on the counter, screen dark. Yeah, I said. It was such a normal request. That's the thing. The moment wasn't suspicious until it was. I picked it up, walked toward the outlet near the couch, and as I did, the screen lit up with a notification. A message preview. Just a few words. Something like, I can't stop thinking about earlier. My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical. I froze. For a second, I told myself it could be anything. A friend. A coworker venting. A misunderstanding. But my hands had already gone cold. The message wasn't from a name I recognized. Just an initial, maybe a saved contact that didn't mean anything. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then another message came in. Did you mean what you said? I could hear Marissa in the kitchen, humming softly as she filled the kettle. Normal. Domestic. Safe. And suddenly none of it felt real. I should have put the phone down. I should have walked into the kitchen and asked, calmly, who is that? But my body didn't move like that. It moved like someone bracing for impact. I sat down slowly, phone in my hand, staring at the screen like it might change. My heart was loud. I told myself, don't do this. Don't become that person. But the tightness that had been building for weeks finally had a shape. I tapped the notification. The phone opened without a passcode. That alone should have meant something. She wasn't hiding it. Or she didn't think she had to. The thread loaded. And there it was. Not one message. Not a misunderstanding. A conversation. Familiar tone. Intimate. The kind of casual closeness you don't have with someone who's just a coworker. I scrolled, slowly, like my brain was trying to delay comprehension. There were jokes. Little private references. Then compliments. Then things that made my throat tighten. I wish I could have stayed longer. I hate going home after being with you. My vision narrowed. My hands started shaking. I scrolled further back, needing it to stop being what it was. But it only became clearer. Plans. Not explicit at first, but implied. Little windows of time. Tomorrow after work? Same place? Then a message that landed like a punch. I feel guilty, but I don't want to stop. Guilty. That word. The same guilt I'd been living inside without proof. I sat there, staring at the screen, and suddenly the last few weeks rearranged themselves in my mind like someone dumping out a box of photos. The affection. The check-ins. The constant reassurance questions. The over-explaining. It wasn't random. It wasn't love blooming. It was guilt management. It was damage control. It was someone trying to keep the relationship looking perfect while something rotten grew underneath. I kept scrolling. And then I saw his name. Ethan. There it was, plain and simple. Not vague anymore. Not a shadow. A person. The messages weren't graphic. They didn't need to be. The emotional intimacy was enough. The familiarity. The way they spoke like two people who had already crossed a line and were pretending the line didn't exist. One message stood out because it was so mundane it hurt. She's asleep next to me right now. My stomach turned. I couldn't breathe. I read it again. She's asleep next to me right now. Meaning me. Meaning while I was in bed, believing her arm around me was love, she was texting someone else about it. The room felt wrong. The couch, the lamp, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, everything looked the same, but it wasn't the same anymore. I wasn't in my life. I was outside it, watching it. Marissa walked back into the living room with 2 mugs. Here, she said, smiling, setting one down. She looked so normal. So warm. So practiced. I must have looked strange, because her smile faltered. What's wrong? I held the phone loosely, like it might burn me. My voice came out flat. Who is Ethan? The air changed instantly. It was subtle, but it was real. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes flicked to the phone. Then back to me. Why? She asked, too quickly. I swallowed. I saw the messages. For a second, she didn't move. Then she sat down slowly, mug trembling slightly in her hand. It's not, she started. I cut her off, not loudly, just firmly. Don't. Silence. The kind of silence she'd been trying to fill for weeks. Now it sat between us, heavy and undeniable. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right version of reality. It didn't mean anything, she said finally. I laughed once, sharply, without humor. It didn't mean anything. She leaned forward, eyes wide, voice urgent. I was going to tell you. That sentence hit me almost as hard as the messages. Because it was the oldest one. The one everyone says. I stared at her. You've been seeing him. Her eyes filled immediately. I made a mistake. Mistake. Not choice. Not betrayal. Mistake. I felt something inside me go very still. All the weeks of affection suddenly felt contaminated. Every kiss at the door. Every, I love you so much. Every question, are we okay? It wasn't love checking in. It was guilt checking the perimeter. I said quietly, that's why you've been like this. She blinked. Like what? All of it, I said, gesturing vaguely. The attention. The reassurance. The performance. Her face crumpled. I was trying, she whispered. Trying. That word again. Trying to fix it. Trying to hide it. Trying to keep me while taking something else. My hands were shaking now, but my voice stayed low. You weren't trying to love me, I said. You were trying to make sure I didn't notice. She covered her mouth, sobbing softly. And in that moment, the strangest thing wasn't anger. It was the realization that the relationship hadn't been falling apart. It had been staged. Held together with affection like tape over a crack. And now that crack was open. I looked at her, this person who had been wrapped around me every night, asking me if I loved her, clinging like she was afraid of losing me. And all I could think was how long she'd been living with the truth while I was living inside the performance. The confrontation didn't explode the way people imagine. There was no screaming. No plates breaking. No dramatic exit. It was quieter than that. And somehow, that made it worse. Marissa sat on the couch with her face in her hands, breathing unevenly. The tea she'd made was untouched, cooling on the table like it belonged to another evening, another version of us. I stayed where I was, phone still in my palm, like holding it kept the truth from slipping away. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I didn't want to hurt you." I stared at her. "You already did." Her shoulders shook. "I know." The air felt thick, like the room had filled with something invisible. I asked, quietly, "How long?" She hesitated. That hesitation was an answer on its own. "Marissa." She swallowed hard. "A few weeks." I felt my chest tighten. "A few weeks," I repeated, like I was tasting the words. She nodded quickly. It wasn't serious. Not serious. The way people say that, as if seriousness is the only measure of damage. I laughed once, again without humor. "You were texting him while I was in bed next to you." Her face crumpled. "I know," she said, voice breaking. "I hate myself for that. Hate. Mistake. Trying." All these words circling around the truth without touching it. I leaned forward slightly. "Why?" She looked up at me, eyes wet, desperate. "I don't know," she said. "It just happened. Just happened. Like weather. Like gravity. Like she was a bystander in her own choices." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "People don't just happen into that." She flinched, like I'd raised my voice. "I was lonely," she whispered. That one landed differently. Lonely. I almost asked, "Lonely with me?" But the question felt like stepping into quicksand. Because if I asked, she would explain. And explanations, I realized in that moment, were part of the distortion. She leaned forward, voice rushing now, the way it always did when she was trying to fill space. "We've been so busy, and work has been stressful," and he was just there, and he listened, and I swear I didn't plan for it to go anywhere. Listening. There it was. The emotional justification. I sat back, feeling numb. "So you listened to him back?" She wiped her cheeks quickly. "I didn't want it," she said, then corrected herself immediately. "I mean, I didn't want it to become this. Become this." As if it had evolved beyond her control. I looked at her for a long time. The person in front of me was the same person who'd been kissing me at the door, asking if I loved her, clinging like she was afraid. And now she was shrinking, apologizing, explaining, rewriting. It was like watching someone scramble to rearrange a room after you've already seen what was hidden under the rug. She reached for my hand. I pulled it back instinctively. Her face tightened. "Please," she said. "Don't do that." "Do what?" I asked. "Pull away," she whispered. The irony of that almost made me dizzy. She had been the one pulling away from us, just not in the way I'd expected. I said, "You've been asking me for reassurance every day." She blinked, confused. "What?" "All those questions," I said. "Are we okay? Do you love me? Promise you won't leave." Her mouth opened slightly. I needed to know." "No," I said softly. "You needed to make sure I didn't suspect anything." Her face hardened for a second, defensive. "That's not fair." Fair. The word felt absurd in the room. I stared at her. Not fair? She shook her head quickly. I wasn't trying to manipulate you. Manipulate. I hadn't even used that word. But it hung there now. Because what else was it? Affection as camouflage. Reassurance as control. A performance of closeness to cover distance. She started crying again. I was trying to fix us, she said. That sentence was almost worse than the others. Fix us. As if the relationship had been broken before she broke it. I asked, fix what? She hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. I just felt scared. Scared of what? She looked down. Losing you. I felt something sharp in my chest. You were losing me while you were doing it. She shook her head, sobbing. I didn't want to choose, she whispered. There it was. The truth underneath all the soft language. Not a mistake. Not loneliness. Not confusion. Not work stress. Not just happening. Not wanting to choose. She wanted both worlds. The safety of me. The thrill of him. And the affection wasn't devotion. It was insurance. I stood up slowly, needing distance, needing air. She looked up at me like a child. Where are you going? I exhaled. I don't know, I said honestly. I need to think. She rose quickly, panic flashing. No, please. Don't leave right now. Her voice was urgent, familiar. The same urgency that had been wrapped in sweetness for weeks. Now it was bare. I love you, she said. I do. I believed she believed it. That was part of the distortion. People can love you and still betray you. People can cry and still choose themselves. I looked at her. Then why did it feel like you were acting? Her face twisted. I wasn't acting. Yes, you were, I said quietly. Maybe not consciously. But you were. She shook her head violently. I was trying to be better. Better. Again. Always better. Never honest. I realized then that the confrontation wasn't about facts. The facts were already there. The confrontation was about reality. About whose version of events would stand. She wanted it to be a mistake, a detour, something that could be folded back into normal. I was sitting in the wreckage of something that had been staged as normal while it was breaking. She stepped closer. Tell me what to do, she pleaded. I'll do anything. Anything. Except undo it. Except unmake the weeks of performance. Except give me back the version of trust I'd lived inside without knowing. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know what the right response was. All I knew was that the person in front of me had been holding me tightly, asking me to promise I wouldn't leave, while she was already somewhere else. And standing there, watching her cry, I realized the hardest part wasn't even the betrayal. It was not knowing how much of what I'd felt recently had been real. After that night, nothing snapped cleanly. There was no clear ending. Just a slow unraveling. The hours after the confrontation felt unreal, like we were moving through a house that belonged to someone else. Marissa stayed close, hovering, asking questions she didn't know how to stop asking. Can we talk? Are you okay? Please don't shut down. I barely responded. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because my mind couldn't hold her voice and the messages at the same time. Everything felt layered now. Her face. Her tone. Her touch. All of it had a second meaning attached. I slept on the couch that night. Not as a statement. Just because I couldn't lie next to her without hearing the words on the screen. She came out once, standing in the hallway in the dark. Can I come sit with you? She whispered. I stared at the ceiling. I don't know, I said. She stood there for a moment, then quietly went back to the bedroom. The next morning, she acted like someone walking on ice. Soft movements. Careful tone. She made coffee. She offered it to me with both hands, like an apology you could drink. I called in sick, she said. I didn't ask why. Of course she did. She didn't want to leave me alone with my thoughts. Or maybe she didn't want to be alone with hers. We existed in the same space, but it didn't feel like being together. It felt like sharing a room after something irreversible. Over the next few days, the reality of it started settling in. Not the fact of the affair. The shape of what it did to everything else. I couldn't look back at the last month without feeling sick. Every affectionate moment replayed differently. The kisses at the door. The sudden sweetness. The constant, "Are we okay?" It was like discovering that a song you loved had been playing over something ugly the whole time. I started questioning myself in ways I hadn't expected. How did I not know? How did I accept it? Was I naive? Or did I ignore what I felt because it was easier? Trust isn't just about the other person. It's about the version of yourself that believes your life is what it looks like. That version of me was gone. I went to work and felt detached, like I was watching my own day from across the room. People asked, "You good?" I nodded. Just tired. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was protecting her. Because I couldn't stand the idea of speaking it out loud and making it real in someone else's ears. At home, Marissa tried to hold on to normal. She cooked. She cleaned. She asked if I wanted to go for a walk. She cried in small bursts, like a faucet that wouldn't fully shut off. "I'm so sorry," she said constantly. "I hate myself. I don't know what I was thinking." Sometimes she'd say, "It was only emotional." Only. As if that made it smaller. Sometimes she'd say, "It didn't go that far." As if the line mattered more than the deception. Sometimes she'd say, "I ended it." As if ending it after being caught was a gift. The words blurred together. They were all attempts to reshape the damage into something survivable. But the damage wasn't just what she did. It was what she turned our relationship into while doing it. A stage. A performance. A place where affection could be used as cover. That realization followed me everywhere. I stopped trusting my own comfort. If someone is kind, are they kind? Or are they compensating? If someone is close, are they close? Or are they hiding? I hated that my mind was doing that. I hated that she had planted that lens in me. One afternoon, I found myself staring at the kitchen counter where her phone had been. That spot became symbolic, like a wound in the room. Everything in the apartment felt slightly poisoned. The couch where she'd curled up against me. The bed where she'd whispered, "You love me, right?" Even the mundane things, grocery lists, laundry baskets, felt like props from a life that had been interrupted. Marissa asked me one night, voice small, "Do you still love me?" I looked at her for a long time. "I don't know what I feel," I said honestly. She started crying again. "I'll do anything," she whispered. "Anything. Except erase the knowledge. Except give me back the version of myself who didn't doubt every smile." The relationship didn't collapse in a single moment. It collapsed in layers. In the way I flinched when she touched me. In the way silence became unbearable. In the way I started leaving the house just to breathe somewhere she wasn't. In the way I realized that staying would mean living inside constant uncertainty. And leaving would mean admitting it was real. I started thinking about Ethan in intrusive flashes. Not because I wanted to. Because my mind needed an object for the betrayal. A face. A person. But he remained abstract. The coworker. The proximity. The access. It wasn't really about him. It was about her choices. And about the way she had held me close while making them. One night, I stood in the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror, and I barely recognized my own expression. I looked older. Not in years. In awareness. Trust changes your face when it breaks. Marissa was asleep in the bedroom, or pretending to be. I stood there, listening to the quiet of the house, and I realized that the relationship I thought I was in no longer existed. What remained was something else. Something fragile and unfamiliar. And the hardest part was that I still couldn't fully separate the person she was from the person she had pretended to be. I didn't know which one had been real. I only knew that I was living in the aftermath of affection that had been staged, and the doubt it left behind was starting to feel permanent. Time didn't fix it. It just made it quieter. In the weeks after everything came out, life kept moving the way it always does. Work schedules. Grocery runs. Bills. Morning light through the blinds. The world didn't stop because my trust did. Marissa and I didn't have some clean breakup scene. We didn't have a dramatic reconciliation either. We existed in this strange in-between for a while, like two people standing in the ruins of something, unsure whether to rebuild or walk away. She tried, in her way. She offered access to her phone. She volunteered details before I asked. She said she'd transfer departments, quit, cut contact. "I'll do whatever you need," she kept saying. But the problem was, I didn't know what I needed. Because what I wanted wasn't more information. What I wanted was ignorance. I wanted to go back to the version of myself who didn't read meaning into kindness. But you can't unknow something once you know it. Even when she was being sincere, I couldn't feel it cleanly. Every gesture had a shadow. If she hugged me, I wondered why. If she complimented me, I wondered what she was trying to soothe. If she asked, "Are we okay?" I heard the echo of all the times she asked it while hiding something. It turned love into an interrogation without words. Eventually, the relationship ended, not with a slam, but with a slow acceptance. One night, I told her, "I don't think I can live inside this." She cried quietly. "I never wanted to lose you." I nodded, exhausted. "I know." And that was the truth, in a strange way. I believed she didn't want to lose me. But wanting isn't the same as choosing. We said goodbye in the softest way possible, which almost felt cruel. There was no villain speech. No closure. Just two people acknowledging that something had been broken in a way that couldn't be repaired by apologies. After she moved out, the apartment felt too empty and too loud at the same time. I noticed small absences. No hair ties on the bathroom counter. No humming in the kitchen. No sudden kisses in the hallway. And even though those things had become tangled with betrayal, I still felt the loss of them. That was the moral confusion of it. You can miss someone who hurt you. You can grieve something that wasn't what you thought it was. I spent a long time replaying the perfect girlfriend phase in my head. Not the affair itself. The performance around it. That was what haunted me. Because I always assumed cheating would look like distance. I assumed it would announce itself with coldness, secrecy, withdrawal. Instead, it arrived wrapped in affection. It arrived as closeness. It arrived as someone holding me tighter than ever. And that's what unsettled me most. The betrayal wasn't just that she was with someone else. It was that she was with me, too, in this heightened, curated way, like she was trying to keep my world intact while she stepped outside it. It made me question something deeper than her. It made me question the signals we rely on. We're taught that love is attention. That effort is proof. That closeness means safety. But what happens when those things can be used as cover? What happens when devotion isn't devotion, but compensation? For a while, I didn't trust my instincts at all. Then I trusted them too much. I'd catch myself analyzing people's tone, their timing, their affection. If someone was distant, I worried. If someone was attentive, I worried. It felt like there was no safe version of closeness anymore. I realized betrayal doesn't just break trust in one person. It breaks your relationship with your own perception. That was the lasting damage. Marissa wasn't a monster. That's important. She wasn't some caricature of evil. She was a person who made choices, justified them, panicked, tried to hold on to what she wanted without facing what she was doing. That's what makes it uncomfortable. Because it's human. And because it means the line between love and self-preservation can get blurry if someone is afraid enough. Sometimes I think about Ethan, too, in the abstract. Not with obsession. More like a symbol. The coworker wasn't the real story. He was proximity. Opportunity. The way ordinary environments can become places where boundaries erode quietly. The real story was what happened inside the relationship while it was happening. How affection became a tool. How reassurance became a mask. How I was being loved harder than ever, and it still wasn't real in the way I thought it was. I don't tell this story because I think I'm special. I tell it because I think people misunderstand betrayal. They think it always comes with obvious signs. They think you'll know because the relationship will start falling apart. Sometimes it doesn't fall apart. Sometimes it gets polished. Sometimes it gets sweeter. Sometimes the person who is hurting you is also the person making sure you don't feel it yet. And that's the part one still don't have a clean answer for. So I'll leave it with the question I ended up carrying long after she was gone. If someone suddenly becomes the perfect partner, how do you know it's love, and not guilt trying to stay ahead of the truth?